My girlfriend put $1 into my hand in front of 40 people, filmed it, and had already typed the caption before my fingers closed around it. His half. In her other hand was a lottery ticket worth $50,000. The dollar was for me so you don't feel left out, baby. And the whole crowd laughed on cue, because a poor kid getting $1 is comedy at Whitmore Academy. For exactly one heartbeat, I saw that phone arc into the deep end. Then I remembered the shoebox under my bed, 100 scratch tickets, every single one a winner, worth a number Sienna couldn't reach with a calculator and a running start. So I pocketed the dollar, thanked her like she'd handed me a kidney, and asked to borrow her pen. You wanted my signature, Sienna? Let's make it official. Smile for the camera. You have no idea what you just bought for $1. Okay, rewind. You need the pieces before you can enjoy the fall, and trust me, you're going to want to enjoy this one slowly. My name is Castle Rayner. Ash blonde, gray hoodie, the kind of quiet that makes teachers forget you're in the room and rich kids forget you're a person. I go to Whitmore Academy, which is the sort of school where a boy shows up in a helicopter and nobody looks up, and where I show up on the 614 bus and everybody looks right through me. Scholarship kid. The tuition line on my folder says waived. The other kids read that word the way you'd read a health code violation. For 2 years, I was the school's favorite appliance. Need your calculus set done by first period? Castle. Need someone to run the numbers on the debate club budget so the treasurer can take credit? Castle. Need a warm body to stand behind your girlfriend in photos so she looks like the type who's nice to poor people. Also Castle. I was useful the way a phone charger in a hotel drawer is useful. Nobody thanks the charger. They just get annoyed when it's not there. The girlfriend, by the way, was Sienna Marlowe. I should explain Sienna, because you're going to want to understand exactly what walked away from me before you enjoy watching it come crawling back. Sienna was beautiful in the specific way that costs money, the whitened smile, the good highlights, the posture of a girl who has never once carried her own bag. Her mother, Vivienne, ran the whole family like a storefront. Everything on display was rented, financed, or borrowed against something already borrowed against. The Marlowes weren't rich. The Marlowes were a very convincing photograph of rich, and the flash was about to die. Sienna picked me the way you pick a pet at a shelter you plan to return. In front of people, she called me my genius. When we were alone, she'd look at my shoes, same gray sneakers resold twice, and her mouth would do a little thing. A flinch she thought I didn't catch. I caught everything. That's sort of my whole deal. I'll get to that. Here's what nobody at Whitmore knew about me. My father left when I was 14, and he didn't leave clean. He left a signature on a loan he never should have signed, from a family friend who turned out to be a wall of shell companies stacked on top of each other like a cheap wedding cake. My mother, Elise, is an actuary. She does risk for a living. She can tell you the odds of anything, and she never saw this one coming because it wasn't an accident. Somebody built that debt on purpose and pointed it at us. By the time I was 15, we were one missed payment from losing the apartment. And my mother had started doing that thing where she smiles at me over dinner while doing math under the table with her fingers. I decided around then that I was going to get us out. My father didn't leave in a dramatic way, which somehow made it worse. There was no shouting match, no other family, no movie version. He just got smaller over a couple of years, quieter at dinner, later home, then not home until one Tuesday. He was a man who mailed a birthday card. And then he was a signature on a loan document I wouldn't understand for another year. I don't hate him exactly. Hate takes energy, and he isn't worth the withdrawal. What I feel about my father is closer to what I feel about the foil defect, a flaw in the print run that happened to cost my family everything, impersonal, structural, a press that ran hot and nobody recalibrated. He signed a paper a family friend put in front of him because he was tired and scared and wanted the fear to stop, and the paper turned out to be the first brick in a wall built to bury us. He bought a year of quiet for himself and sold his wife and son the mortgage on it. Then he left, so he wouldn't have to watch the bill come due. The night I decided to get us out, I was 15, and I'd come out to the kitchen for water at 2 in the morning and found my mother still at the table, the good lamp on, the envelope spread, doing the finger math in the dark, thinking no one could see. She wasn't crying. That's the part that did it. She was just working the problem over and over, an actuary running the same numbers, hoping they'd land somewhere survivable, and they wouldn't, and she knew they wouldn't. And she kept running them anyway, because stopping meant admitting the answer. I stood in the hallway and watched my mother be brave at a kitchen table with nobody clapping, and something in me went very cold and very clear. The first time I ever felt the laboratory cold I'd later feel about Marcus. I didn't feel sad. I felt decided. Somebody built this to break us, I thought. So I'll build something to break it. I just didn't have the tool yet. The tool was 3 weeks away, sitting under a scratch coating on a loser ticket she was about to leave on the counter. Not with a lottery ticket. I hate luck. Luck is what people believe in right up until the moment it's used against them. What I found instead was better than luck. It was a mistake. The gas station across from the school offers fuel and convenience, run by a tired, kind man named Mr. Okafor, who let me sit and do homework in the back booth because I bought a coffee and never caused trouble. Sold scratch-off tickets from a state series printed by a company called Meridian Print. And Meridian, it turned out, had a defect, a tiny one, a registration error in the foil layer, the kind of thing that happens when a printing press runs hot and nobody recalibrates it. On the winning tickets, the pattern of the security ink underneath the scratch coating left a shadow. A ghost. If you knew where to look and you'd graft a few hundred of them like a lunatic, which I had, in a notebook I kept between my mattress and the wall. You could read whether a ticket was a winner before you scratched a single millimeter. Not magic. A bug. The kind of bug that, if a hedge fund found it, they'd call it alpha and put it in a pitch deck. I found it by accident, which is the only honest way to find anything. My mother had bought a ticket once, on a bad week, the way people do when the math finally wins and they need to buy a minute of hope for $2. She scratched it, lost, and left it on the counter. I picked it up to throw it away, and the light hit the foil sideways, and I saw it, a faint grid under the coating, a watermark that wasn't supposed to be readable. Most people would have blinked and moved on. I'm not most people. I'm the kid who alphabetizes his own resentments. So I started collecting losers out of the trash bins outside every gas station in a 10-mile radius. Hundreds of them. And I graphed the ghost grids against the tickets that had actually paid out, which I got by loitering near the redemption counter and writing down serial numbers like the world's saddest birdwatcher. 6 weeks of that. And then one night the whole thing snapped into focus like a magic eye poster. The winners had a defect in the foil registration, a printing hiccup, a ½ millimeter of misalignment that put a shadow exactly where the payout code lived. I could read it, every time, before I scratched. The first time I tested it live, I stood at the rack for 10 minutes with my heart going like a woodpecker on espresso. Picked the one ticket I'd read as a winner, scratched it, and won $300. I threw up a little in the gas station bathroom. Then I did it again the next day at a different store. Then I made rules, because a bug without rules is just a slower way to get caught. Rule 1, never the same store twice in a week. Rule 2, never a jackpot, only middling wins, the boring kind nobody flags. Rule 3, cash out in cash, spread it, and put most of it toward the debt, in payments small enough that the wall of shell companies would just quietly absorb them without noticing a 17-year-old was starving their trap from the inside. Rule 4, the one that mattered most. Tell no one, ever. I broke Rule 4 exactly twice. Once for Juno by accident, once for Sienna on purpose, like an idiot. I didn't go wild with it. That's important, and it's the reason this story ends the way it does, instead of with me in a jumpsuit. I bought small. I bought at different stores. I cashed out in amounts that never tripped a single wire. I wasn't building a jackpot. I was building an exit slow, quiet, boring money. The kind that gets my mother's name off a forged loan and buys back the 14-year-old who used to think his dad was coming home. The only person who ever noticed was Juno Vale. Juno was another scholarship kid, which at Whitmore is a bit like being another leper. She lived in the finance and coding club, which had 3 members and no windows. And she had the personality of a girl who learned early that being liked was a luxury she couldn't afford. So she'd traded it for being right. Flat voice, dry as a spreadsheet. The first time she saw me at Okafor's, standing at the ticket rack, turning cards over without scratching them, she watched me for a solid minute and then said, in the tone you'd use to point out I had spinach in my teeth, "You found a pattern. It's the foil, isn't it? What's the series step?" Most people, you show them a miracle, they clap. Juno saw a miracle and asked to see the schematics. I liked her immediately, which terrified me. So naturally, I said something suave like, "I don't know what you're talking about," and she said, "Okay," and went back to her energy drink, and we did not speak again for 3 weeks. New fear unlocked. A girl who was smarter than my secret. Mr. Okafor, on the other hand, knew nothing about the bug and everything about me, which is a rarer and better kind of knowing. He'd immigrated with an engineering degree the country decided didn't count, and now he ran a gas station and treated it like a small nation he was president of. He gave me the back booth. He'd slide a coffee over and not charge me on the weeks he could tell were bad. He could always tell. He read faces the way I read foil. Once, when a customer called me the help for reaching past him at the counter, Okafor took a full 30 seconds to find that man's cigarettes, then found them out of stock. Then found them again the moment the man apologized to me. He never said a word about it. He just restocked the shelf. That's a whole personality right there. I bought my tickets from him last, always, and only the boring middling ones, because I would rather have eaten the notebook than turn that man's store into evidence. Remember that. It matters later. when everyone with a suit and a badge is trying to figure out which store the syndicate was working out of. School, meanwhile, kept me humble in the way a belt sander keeps wood humble. There was a running thing, I won't dignify it by calling it bullying. Bullying implies effort, where a cluster of Dorian's friends would forget my name on purpose. Hey, casserole? Cassette? Whatever. Every day a new appliance name. I'd correct them once, flat, and they'd laugh, because a scholarship kid correcting a boat shoe kid is apparently the funniest thing that can happen indoors. I let it slide, every time, and I wrote every name down in the same notebook as the tickets on a page I labeled, with no irony at all, invoices. I'm a big believer in paying debts. I just prefer to settle them all at once, in full, at a time of my choosing. I want to be clear about Juno and Sienna, because the whole engine of everything that happened is the difference between them. Sienna once made Juno cry in front of 40 people. It was sophomore year. Juno had won a regional coding thing, and there was a little ceremony in the atrium, and Sienna, who had lost a most likely to succeed vote to Juno by 2 ballots, and never got over it, waited until the applause and then said loud, sweet, poisonous. It's so inspiring what they let charity cases do these days. Everyone laughed. Adults laughed. Juno's face went the exact gray of a scratched-off ticket with nothing under the foil, and she walked out, and she did not come back to the atrium for the rest of the year. I was there for that. I stood in the crowd and did nothing, because back then I was a phone charger, and phone chargers don't have opinions. I've thought about that a lot since. It's on the short list of things I owe. So that's the board. A boy who hates luck and found a bug. A mother buried under a debt somebody built on purpose. A gas station man who gave me a booth. A girl in a windowless club who once got called a charity case in front of the whole school. And a girlfriend who was a photograph of Rich with the flash dying. Now, the ticket. Here's the part Sienna will spend the rest of her life wishing she could edit. About a month before the pool party, she was hanging on my arm at Okafor's. She'd started doing that, appearing when she was bored, treating my one safe place like a backdrop. And she was whining that I never did anything fun. So I did a stupid, sentimental thing. The kind of thing I don't usually do, because sentiment is how smart people get robbed. I picked a ticket off the rack. A winner. I'd read it in half a second. A fat one, a $50,000 shadow sitting right there under the foil, and I handed it to her. Scratch it, I said, for fun. I told myself it was a gift, some soft, hopeful part of me, the part that still had my father's face in it, wanted to give her one good thing, and watch her be happy in a way that wasn't rented. I wanted, God help me, to see if she'd be sweet if I handed her a reason to be. She scratched it. $50,000 bloomed up out of the silver like a bruise going backward. And I watched Sienna Marlowe's whole face change, not into joy, into calculation. I know that face. I graph faces the same way I graph tickets. Her eyes did the little flick that Vivienne's eyes did, the storefront flick, the one that's already rearranging the display. In that half second, she wasn't thinking we won. She was thinking, how do I make this mine? I should have known right then. I did know, honestly, in the cold back room of my head where I keep the things I'm too much of a coward to feel out loud. But I let it ride. I wanted to be wrong. It's the only genuinely dumb thing I did in this entire story. And I did it because for about a year I'd wanted a girl to look at me and see me instead of my usefulness. And I mistook her staring at the ticket for staring at me. Rookie error. Note to self, filed permanently. Never confuse a person looking at your money with a person looking at you. Over the next 3 weeks, Sienna built her little renovation. She started talking about our win as the win, then as my win, sanding my name off it one conversation at a time, the way you'd strip paint. I watched it happen in real time and said nothing, which drove her crazy because Sienna needed me to fight so she could feel like she was winning. At lunch one day, she tested it out loud, right in front of her friends. Cass, you don't even care about the money, right? You're not like a money person. And she smiled at me, warm and public, a smile with a knife folded inside it like a switchblade in a birthday card. What she meant was, agree that it's mine, in front of witnesses, so I can screenshot your face. I looked at her, and I looked at the 3 girls holding their phones at the ready like a firing squad in athleisure, and I said, you're right. I'm not. True sentence. I'm not a money person. I'm a getting my mother out of a forged debt person. Different animal, harder to kill. She heard the first thing and missed the second, which was becoming a pattern with her. Meanwhile, 3 miles away in a rented townhouse with a leased sedan out front and a second mortgage nobody talked about, Vivienne Marlowe sat her daughter down and did the thing she does best, which is turn a feeling into a spreadsheet. 50,000 covers the spring, she'd have said, not the summer. We need the summer covered, and we need it covered clean, and we need him gone before he grows a spine. Get it in writing, get it on video, make it a joke so nobody remembers it was a signature, and smile, sweetheart. You catch more with honey, then you don't have to give the honey back. Vivian got involved, which is how I knew it had gone from a lie into a plan. Vivian doesn't waste her energy on a $50,000 teenager's crush. Vivian smelled a way to keep the storefront lit for one more season, and $50,000 was the extension cord. And there was Dorian. Dorian Ashcroft. If you took every golden boy cliché, the jaw, the boat shoes, the effortless way he'd sling an arm around a teacher and get an extension, and you gave it a trust fund and no inner life, you'd get Dorian. His father is Marcus Ashcroft of Ashcroft Holdings, which is the kind of company that owns the building your dentist rents. Dorian had never wanted anything he didn't get, which is why the one thing he couldn't stand was the idea that somewhere, someone had something. He didn't want Sienna. He wanted the story. Local girl, sudden windfall, and him at the center of it. Generous and golden, lifting her up out of the scholarship gutter. He'd started circling her the second the money showed. She thought she'd caught a prince. She'd caught a boy who collects other people's good luck, the way some kids collect sneakers, and throws it out just as fast. Here's the thing about Dorian and Marcus Ashcroft that I didn't know yet that I was about 3 weeks from finding out. And I need you to hold on to it. Because it's the whole spine of what's coming. Meridian Print, the company whose defective foil was quietly funding my mother's freedom, was a shell. And the wall of shell companies that built the forged debt that buried my mother? Same wall, same architect. The bug I'd been feeding on and the boot that had been on my family's neck came out of the exact same building owned by the exact same man, whose son was currently trying to steal my girlfriend for content. I didn't design that. The universe just occasionally hands you a coincidence so clean it feels like a threat. My wound and my enemy had the same return address. And once I really saw it, the whole small, careful, get-us-out plan I'd been running turned into something else. Something with a list at the bottom of it. That came later. First, the party. The pool party was at Dorian's obviously because Sienna's house was rented and you don't host at the storefront. It was billed as a "we won" party, which already told me everything. You don't throw a party to celebrate someone else's 50 grand unless the plan is to take it. I almost didn't go. My mother told me to go. Go be 17 for one night, she said, doing math with her fingers under the table. You've been 40 since you were 14, so I went. Gray hoodie and a sea of linen. The charger, plugged in one last time. I found out what the party was for about 20 minutes in, when Sienna clinked a glass and got everyone's attention and told the whole crowd, on camera, the story of how she found the winning ticket. Not us. She, a funny little origin myth where I existed as a blurry extra, and my boyfriend was there, I guess, holding my drink. Laughter. Dorian's arm finding her waist like it had a reservation. And then she came over to me, sweet as anything, phone up and did the dollar. Honest half, baby. $1 bill, folded small. You didn't buy anything. And then the napkin. She had it ready. That's the detail that tells you it wasn't cruelty. It was a contract. A cocktail napkin with a joke written on it in her bubbly handwriting. I, Castle Rayner, agree my share of the lottery win is $1 paid in full. Signed. Everyone thought it was a bit. A gag. Get the poor boyfriend to sign away his claim as a party laugh. Film it. Post it. Except a filmed, signed statement in front of 40 witnesses is the kind of joke that holds up in exactly the room Sienna and Vivian were hoping it would never need to. The room where somebody asks who really owned that ticket. She wanted the $50,000 clean. She wanted me on record giving it away with a smile, so that if I ever came back for my half, there was video of me laughing while I signed it off. Vivian's fingerprints all over it. Cover the storefront's debts, keep the lights on, trade up to Dorian, and leave the charger in the drawer. I looked at the napkin. I looked at the phone. I looked at Sienna's face, which was doing the storefront flick, already counting the views. And somewhere under my mattress, in a shoebox, 100 scratch tickets sat quietly being worth 100 times what she was fighting me for. So I took her pen. I signed the napkin. I tucked the dollar into my hoodie pocket like it was the nicest thing anyone had ever given me, and I smiled a real one, which I think unsettled her more than tears would have. Thank you, I said. This means a lot. Then I left the party on foot in the dark, with $1 and a bug that could rewrite both our lives. She thought she'd taken everything and left me $1. She'd taken a $50,000 splinter and handed me the clear road to a fortune and filmed herself doing it. She just didn't know which of us the video was actually going to bury. I walked home that night, doing the one thing that has ever reliably calmed me down, which is arithmetic. $50,000. That was the number in Sienna's hand. That was the whole prize she'd filmed herself amputating me from, with a pen and a napkin and a crowd. To a Marlowe, 50,000 is a season of oxygen, a leased car, a good colorist, enough runway to trade up to a golden boy before anyone audits the storefront. She thought she'd taken the pot. Here's the number I was walking home with. 100 tickets. 99 of them middling winners already read and sorted in my head. 500 here, 2,000 there, boring, staggered, clean. And one I hadn't scratched, that I'd been carrying in the lining of my backpack for 2 weeks like a live coal, because the shadow under its foil wasn't a 500 shadow. It was the top prize, $1.2 million. The 50 grand she was strangling? I'd handed her that ticket a month ago on purpose. It was a coin I flicked into a fountain to see what she'd wish for. She wished to keep it and cut me out. Test complete, results filed, crumb deployed. She fought me like a raccoon over a dropped fry while I stood on a mountain of the stuff. And the funniest part, the part I turned over in my head the whole walk home, is that she'd have sworn under oath she'd cleaned me out. You can't con someone who's already handed you the bait and is timing how fast you bite. I got home a little after 1. My mother was at the kitchen table with the good lamp on and a spread of envelopes in front of her, doing the finger math, and she looked up and read my face the way Okafor reads a bad week. "That good, huh?" she said. I told her it was fine. I told her the party was fine. I did not tell her that her son had just signed away a $50,000 decoy in front of 40 witnesses and walked home with a lit fuse in his backpack. Because there are things you protect your mother from, and one of them is the shape of the plan you're about to run on the man who buried her. She has no idea about the tickets. She thinks the payments that have been quietly shrinking her debt are some clerical mercy, some interest recalculation, a bank being decent for once. Let her think it. She'll know everything the day it's safe to know, and not one day before. That's not me being cold. That's me being the only warm thing I know how to be. 2 days later, Juno Vale sat down across from me in the windowless clubroom, uninvited, set an energy drink on the table between us like a chess opening and said, "You cashed a $1,200 ticket at the Route 9 Mart on Tuesday, and a 2 grand at the Eastgate Circle K on Thursday, and you've been doing some version of that for months, and either you're the luckiest person alive or you found something. You don't strike me as lucky." Lucky people smile. I want to describe the specific fear of being read out loud by someone who is better at it than you. It's like getting undressed in a room you thought was empty. My whole body wanted to deny it. My mouth actually opened to deny it. And then I looked at Juno flat stare, 3-week grudge over the word charity case, still sitting behind her eyes like a second job. And I realized the single most useful thing I would learn all year. The smartest person in the building had spent 2 years being underestimated by the same people underestimating me. And she wasn't asking to expose me, she was asking to be let in. "It's the foil," I said. "Meridian series, registration defect. I can read the winners before I scratch." Juno did not gasp. Juno leaned back, exhaled through her nose, and said, "That's beautiful," in the tone most people reserve for sunsets. Then in the next breath, because that's who she is, "You're doing it wrong. You're cashing in your own name at stores near your own school on a predictable cadence. You've built a pattern a half-awake fraud analyst could draw with their eyes closed. You need structuring. You need geography. You need to not look like a signal. I do that. That's literally the thing I'm good at that this school pretends is a personality defect. Reader, I have never been courted, and I'm fairly sure that was the closest I'll ever come. A girl offering to launder my scratch-off winnings competently. My heart did a thing I chose not to examine. So we became a firm. Not friends yet, a firm. She built me a schedule. Stores rotated across 3 counties. Cash-out amounts jittered to look human. A boring shell of a story for every redemption. She was right about all of it, which I found deeply attractive and mildly threatening. We'd meet in the clubroom after last period, and she'd walk me through the week's map with the patience of a woman explaining fire to a caveman. And somewhere in the 3rd week of that, I stopped noticing that I was no longer doing this alone. We had one scare early that told me exactly how good she was. I'd cashed at a store she hadn't cleared. I'd been in the neighborhood. It was convenient. I broke my own geography rule for a $2,000 winner because I was a teenager and impatient. Juno found out because Juno watches everything, and she did not yell, which was scarier than yelling. She pulled up the store on a map, then pulled up the 2 other stores I'd hit that month and drew the triangle and said, "See that? You just made a shape." Analysts don't catch amounts. Castle. Amounts are noise. They catch shapes. One more careless win in this zip code and you're a dot on a heat map. And a dot becomes a pattern, and a pattern becomes a subpoena. Then she spent that whole night rebuilding the schedule from scratch to bury the triangle inside a cloud of decoy geography, cashing 3 tiny legitimate winners herself at her own risk in the wrong places on purpose to make my careless shape look like part of a bigger random smear. She committed a small crime to cover my sloppiness and never once mentioned owing me anything for it. I learned 2 things that night. 1, never break the geography rule. 2, the person across the table was the most competent human being I had ever met, and she'd chosen, for reasons I didn't deserve yet, to spend that competence on me. I found out Juno's reasons slowly, in fragments she'd drop and then look annoyed at having dropped. She'd come up harder than me, which I hadn't thought was possible. Her mom worked doubles. There was no dad in the picture to even resent. She'd taught herself everything she knew on library machines and hand-me-down laptops with the screens going. And she'd learned early that the world hands smart poor girls a very specific insult. It calls their competence attitude and their ambition not knowing her place. Whitmore had spent 2 years doing exactly that to her, filing the sharpest kid in the building under difficult, and Sienna's atrium performance had just been the loudest version of a thing the whole school did quietly. So when Juno saw me at the ticket rack, a poor kid who'd found an edge and was too disciplined to be lucky, she didn't see a mark or a miracle. She saw the only other person in the building who'd been underestimated at the same frequency she had, and who might for once be worth the risk of being seen next to. The first thing we did with real money, the first winner, big enough to matter, cashed clean, Juno didn't let me spend or even bank normally, she placed it. Boring index positions, a custodial structure her library-taught self had researched to the studs, everything legal and dull and compounding. Broke kids blow it, then they're broke kids with a story, she said. We're not doing the story. We're doing the boring thing that the rich kids' parents do and never explain to us because they'd rather we stay impressed by cars. I watched her turn a scratch-off win into an actual position at 17, in a windowless clubroom, and I understood that the tickets had never been the real edge. Juno was the edge. The foil just got me to the table where she was sitting. Here's a Juno moment I keep. We were sorting tickets one afternoon, and I made some throwaway joke about being a charity case, using the exact words Sienna had used on her in the atrium 2 years earlier. I hadn't done it on purpose. I'd just reached for the nearest self-deprecating knife, and Juno went very still. I realized what I'd said about half a second too late. I started to apologize. She cut me off. Don't, she said. You were there that day, in the crowd. I saw you beat. You didn't laugh. Longer beat. And then, quieter, the closest that girl ever got to soft. You were the only one who didn't laugh. I remember the room by who was laughing. You weren't in it. I didn't know what to do with that. So I did the emotionally mature thing and knocked my energy drink over. She watched it spread toward the tickets and said, if you ruin a winner, I will end you, and moved them 1 inch to safety. And neither of us mentioned the other thing again. But the temperature between us had changed by exactly 1 degree, and I've built entire futures on less. We started calling it the fund. Half a joke at first. 100 tickets, 99 cashed, slow and clean. 1 enormous coal still cooling in my backpack. And instead of buying a car or a chain or any of the loud broke kid with money mistakes, we'd stack it, structure it, put it somewhere it could grow. 2 underdogs and a spreadsheet. It sounds small when I say it. It did not stay small. I should tell you about the night the firm almost became something else, because it's the first time I understood Juno wasn't just a partner I'd gotten lucky with. We were in the clubroom past dark, both of us fried, a rotation map half built on her screen. And I said something dumb. I'd been reading her a headline about some crypto kid who'd lost 40 million in a week, and I said, aren't you scared we'll blow it? We're 17. We have a shoebox and a spreadsheet against a guy who owns the building your dentist rents. And Juno looked at me for a second, and instead of reassuring me, which is what a normal person does, she said, you're asking the wrong question. The question isn't whether we're smart enough. We're the 2 smartest people either of us knows, which is depressing but useful. The question is whether you can keep being cold when it's your mom on the line. That's the crack. That's where guys like Ashcroft win. They wait for you to feel something at the wrong second. She held my stare. So don't. When it's her, come get me. I'll be the cold one for both of us. I've been told a lot of things by a lot of people. Nobody had ever offered to carry the part of me that gets people like me killed. I didn't have a line ready. For once, the coward in me and the strategist in me both just sat there, quiet, agreeing. You're kind of terrifying, I said, which is the most romantic thing I'm currently capable of. I know, she said, and slid the last winner into the folder, and turned off the good screen so the room went to the blue of the vending machine. And for a second, neither of us moved. Then she stood up, hit me lightly on the shoulder with the folder, and said, walk me to the bus, Plankton. Borrowing Sienna's insult and diffusing it into something that was almost ours. I walked her to the bus. I chickened out of every single thing a braver boy would have said. New fear unlocked. A girl I'd trust with the plan and can't manage a sentence in front of. I put it on a list. Different list while we built, Sienna spent. I have to hand it to her. When Sienna Marlowe decides to celebrate, she does not do it quietly. Within a week of the party, the $50,000 started evaporating in the most public ways available to a 17-year-old with a rented sense of taste. First, the car. Not bought, least of course, a shiny thing with a monthly payment shaped like a trap, because a Marlowe's instinct is always to convert money into the appearance of more money. Then the trip, The bags, the treat dinners she posted from, captioned with variations on manifested this, and she's booked and busy. Vivienne must have been chewing furniture. The plan had been to bank it and cover the summer. Sienna's plan was to look rich immediately and let tomorrow file its own paperwork. And she dumped me. Publicly, formally, as an event. She did it in the school courtyard at lunch. Loud enough to carry, because a breakup Sienna doesn't get to perform as a breakup Sienna doesn't count as real. "I've outgrown you, Cass," she announced to me, but really to the phones. You're plankton, you know? You float around and you attach to whatever's bigger and you call it a relationship. She was proud of that one. You could tell she'd written it in the Notes app the night before and rehearsed the delivery. Plankton. The crowd made the "oh" sound crowds make. Dorian, standing at her shoulder in a linen shirt that cost more than my mother's monthly payment, smiled the smile of a man watching a purchase get delivered. I said, "Okay, that's it. That's the whole clapback. Okay." And I picked up my tray and left. It short-circuited her completely. She'd built a whole finale expecting me to fight, to plead, to give her the scene that made her the star. And I handed her a one-word receipt and walked off to eat my sandwich somewhere with less audience. She spent the rest of that lunch period looking like a firework that went off in a soundproof room. A performance with no reaction is just a person talking to themselves in a courtyard, and everyone's slowly realizing it. The plankton line, incidentally, is my favorite thing she ever gave me. And I'll tell you why later. It's the kind of insult that ages like milk. Two good things happened that same week, and I want them on the record, because a revenge story with no warmth in it is just a spreadsheet with a body count. The first was Okafor. He'd caught wind the school gossip reached even his back booth that the Marlowe girl had dumped the scholarship kid at a lottery party. And one afternoon he set a coffee in front of me. I hadn't ordered and said in his careful kingly way, "The ones who leave when they think you have nothing. That is a gift, you understand? They label themselves. You do not have to guess anymore who they were." He tapped the counter twice, which is Okafor for end of sermon, and went back to restocking. I've paid for a lot of therapy I didn't get in that man's back booth. Price of one coffee. The second was my mother. Her debt hit a number that quarter that I'd been aiming at for a year, the point where the forged loan stopped growing faster than we could feed it, where the line on the page finally, for the first time since I was 14, started to bend the right way. She didn't know why. She thought it was a recalculation, a mercy, a bank being human. She sat at the good lamp and did the finger math twice because she didn't trust it, and then she put her hands flat on the table and just breathed for a while. And I watched from the hallway and did not say a word, because the day I get to tell her it was me, Mom, it was me the whole time, is a day I'm saving, and it will be worth more than the $1.2 million to say it out loud. I also did one quiet thing that week that I'm not proud of and would do again. Dorian's crew had a group chat. I know this because Whitmore's network security was designed by people who assumed poverty was the only firewall they needed against a scholarship kid. And Juno went through it like a warm knife, and in that chat they'd started a little betting pool on how long before I crawled back to Sienna. Actual odds. Actual money, small money, golden boy pocket lint. I didn't leak it. I didn't blow it up. I just had Juno note every name and every number in the unlabeled tab, next to the plankton video and the atrium. And I let them keep betting against a comeback that was never coming, on a boy they'd priced completely wrong. Let the odds run. I like being underestimated. It's the cheapest edge there is, and these people were handing it to me for free. There was one more thing she did that week, and this one wasn't loud, so almost nobody clocked it. Sienna had a scholarship application in for a private college fund, a real one. Competitive. The kind of thing that could have been her actual future if she'd wanted a future instead of a highlight reel. With 50 grand in hand and a golden boy on her arm, she decided she was above it. She let it lapse. Worse, she posted about it. A little story filmed in her leased car. Turns out you don't need charity when you're just built different. She looked right into the lens when she said charity. I don't think she was aiming at Juno. I think she'd just forgotten Juno was a person you could hit. That's the thing about Sienna. She didn't have enemies, she had furniture, and you don't apologize to furniture, and you certainly don't watch out for it. Juno saw the video, she didn't say anything. She just added a new tab to our spreadsheet, unlabeled, and I didn't ask what it was for, because I already knew. Some accounts you settle in cash, some you settle in outcomes. There was one afternoon in there I want to give you in full, because it's the only time before the very end that Sienna and I collided in public with Juno in the room, and it taught me something about the shape of what was coming. It was in the atrium. The same atrium which the universe apparently only owns one of. Sienna was holding court about the win, again, to a ring of the usual phones, and she saw me cross the far side with Juno, and she couldn't help herself. Because a girl performing wealth needs a poor person in frame for scale. Cass, she called, sweet carrying. Come say hi. Don't be weird about the money thing. The ring turned. She wanted the plankton to shuffle over, mumble, be small. Instead, I walked over calm because a cornered animal runs and a bored one strolls, and I've always preferred to look bored. Congrats again on your feeling, I said. The one where you picked the ticket. Something flickered. She hadn't expected me to reference the lie to her face, lightly, in front of witnesses. I mean, I did, she said, and the sweetness thinned by a degree. Sure, I said. $50,000 off a feeling. That's incredible odds. You should do it again. I let that sit exactly one beat. Buy another one. Same series, same store. See if the feeling's still good. And I smiled, and I watched her do the math. She couldn't do that if she bought another Meridian ticket to prove her luck. She'd either lose in front of everyone or, if she got weirdly lucky twice, draw the exact attention that would eventually sink her. In either way, I'd handed her a dare she couldn't take, wrapped as encouragement. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. The ring of phones, sensing the wind had changed, started drifting. Anyway, I said, enjoy the feeling. And I walked off. Juno fell into step beside me, and once we were clear, said, without looking over, you just dared her to reproduce a statistical impossibility in public, and she can't. Now she knows she can't. And she'll spend a week wondering if you know something. Beat. That was mean. I liked it. Do it more. I'm trying to be the cold kind of person, not the mean kind, I said. You can be both when it's her, Juno said. I'll allow it. Cold for the plan, mean for the girl who called me a charity case in this exact room. I'm not a saint, Castle. I'm a spreadsheet with a grudge and excellent posture. She said it flat, and I laughed. An actual one, the first real laugh I'd had since the party, and she glanced over at the sound of it like she was cataloging it, and something in her face did the quarter thaw, and she looked away fast. Don't make it weird, she said to a laugh, and I said, you made it weird, and she said, I did not. And that was the whole romance for that month. Two underdogs arguing about who made it weird, walking out of the atrium that had humiliated us both, no longer small in it. Now the part where the whole thing stopped being about a girl and a dollar and became about something with a return address. I'd always known Meridian Print was a shell. You don't graph a company's tickets for 6 weeks without getting curious about the company. Shells are boring on the surface and load-bearing underneath. And this one had that specific smell. No website worth the name, a registered agent that also fronted for 200 other paper companies, an address that turned out to be a mail drop above a nail salon. Fine. Lots of state contractors are quietly gross. I filed it and kept feeding on the bug. What I didn't do until Juno was in the room was pull the thread all the way. She's better at this than me. She treats a corporate registry the way I treat a ticket rack, reading the shadow under the foil. One rainy afternoon, she flipped her laptop around and showed me the diagram she'd built. Meridian Print sat at the bottom. Above it, a holding company. Above that, another. Above that, a name I knew. Ashcroft. Meridian Print, whose defective foil had been quietly buying back my mother's freedom one clean cash out at a time, was owned 4 shells up, but owned by Ashcroft Holdings. Marcus Ashcroft's empire, Dorian Ashcroft's father's empire. And then Juno pulled the second thread, the one that made my ears ring. Because I'd told her about the debt, the forged loan, the wall of shells that buried my dad's signature and my mother's sleep, and she'd gotten quiet and gone digging. And the wall that built our debt and the wall that owned Meridian weren't neighbors. They were the same wall, same registered agent, same mail drop above the same nail salon. The man whose printing mistake I'd been eating to survive was the same man who had manufactured, on purpose, the thing I was trying to survive. I sat with that for a long minute. The bug I'd been feeding on and the boot that had been on my family's neck came out of the exact same building. My exploit and my wound had the same author. Most people in that moment feel rage. I want to be honest about what I felt, because it's the thing that separates me from every version of me that would have lost. I felt cold. Clean, quiet, laboratory cold. Rage is loud and it makes you visible and it makes you sign napkins at parties. What I felt was the click of a plan finally showing me its full shape, the way a magic eye poster snaps into focus, the way the foil defect had snapped years ago. On a loser ticket my mother left on the counter. Because here's what the return address changed. I hadn't just found a way to pay off a debt. I'd found the frayed thread at the bottom of the entire Ashcroft sweater. If Meridian was skimming a state lottery printing contract sloppily enough to leave a readable defect on the actual tickets, then Meridian was skimming, period. And a company skims for the empire above it. And empires that skim leave a trail. And a trail is just a dossier that hasn't been assembled yet. I had 2 years of ticket data. Juno had a gift for registries and a spreadsheet with an unlabeled tab. And somewhere in that building was the same paper that had forged my father's signature. I took the notebook out from between my mattress and the wall that night, the one with the ticket graphs, and the school page labeled invoices, and a mostly empty page at the back I'd never had a real use for. I labeled that page too. I'm not going to tell you what I wrote at the top of it yet, but I crossed one name off it before I wrote anything else. Juno's. She was the only name that started on that page and got moved to a different one, the short list of people I'd protect instead of process. The girl in the windowless club, the charity case who asked to see the schematics, the only one who didn't laugh. You don't put the person who chose to be in your corner in the same column as the people who put you in the dirt. That's not strategy. That's the one rule underneath all the other rules. Meanwhile, in a house with no rented furniture in it at all, Marcus Ashcroft was doing what men like Marcus do when a thread starts to pull, which is nothing, because he couldn't feel it yet. Dorian had mentioned me exactly once over dinner as a punchline. Sienna's ex, some charity kid, total plankton. And Marcus had given the polite quarter laugh of a man whose son's problems are too small to file. That quarter laugh was the last easy breath that family took, and not one of them heard the clock start. I'd have paid to be in that dining room. As it happened, I didn't have to be. I had the building's whole paper trail cooling in a shoebox, and a partner who could read it. And there was a logistics problem I want you to watch me solve. Because the fantasy here isn't that I got lucky. I was never lucky, not once, and I want the receipts. A minor cannot walk into a lottery office and claim $1.2 million without tripping every siren in the state. So we didn't. Juno mapped the rules the way she maps everything. The 99 middling winners could be cashed clean and staggered under my own steam, and the coal, the jackpot, would wait. There's a claim window measured in months. I'd turn 18 inside it. By the time I walked up to that counter, it would be with a lawyer at my shoulder, a clean paper story behind me, and the calmest face in the room. The coal wasn't going out. It was going to be scratched at exactly the right second, in exactly the right room, in front of exactly the right people. Timing is the entire art. Sienna scratched her ticket for a party. I was going to scratch mine for a verdict. There's a version of this story where I'm just a kid who got dumped and got even. That version's fine. People like that version. But I want you to understand what was actually on the table by the end of that month, because it changes how you watch everything that comes next. Under my bed, a shoebox with 99 clean winners and one uncut coal worth $1.2 million. In my backpack, a notebook that had quietly become a case file. Across the clubroom table, the one person at Whitmore who'd ever read me write and decided to stand next to me anyway. And 3 miles away in a house of rented furniture, a girl was posting from a leased car about being built different, and her golden boy was smiling at a purchase. And neither of them had any idea that the plankton had already found the bottom of their ocean and that the whole thing was resting on it. For about 6 weeks, everything went exactly to plan, which should have been my first warning. Plans that go exactly to plan are usually just traps that haven't finished loading. The thing that pulled the thread wasn't me. It was Sienna, which is almost too perfect. Her $50,000 ticket, the decoy I'd handed her, from the Meridian series, with the defect baked right into the foil, was too loud. She'd posted the win, posted the leased car, posted the whole manifested this origin myth, and somewhere in a beige office, a lottery commission analyst doing routine variance work noticed something the Marlows never would. A single retail location was printing an impossible density of winners. The store didn't matter. The series mattered. And a review of the series is a review of the printer. And the printer was Meridian, and Meridian was the frayed thread at the bottom of Marcus Ashcroft's entire sweater. Marcus didn't panic. Men like Marcus don't panic. They delegate the panic downward and keep their own hands clean and cold. The commission review of the Meridian series was an existential problem for him, because if anyone looked hard at why those tickets were printing readable defects, they'd find the skim underneath a state contract quietly bled for years, the kind of thing that doesn't end in a fine. It ends in a perp walk. So Marcus needed 2 things, fast. He needed the review pointed away from the printer, and he needed a story about where all those extra winners came from that didn't involve the words, "Our foil is defective." He needed a criminal, a nice, small, disposable one. Picture the room where that decision got made, because I have many times, and it helps. Marcus Ashcroft does not have meetings in restaurants. He has them in a glass office 40 floors up, in a chair that costs more than my mother's car, with a lawyer named Prewitt who has the moral range of a parking meter. When the Meridian problem crossed his desk, Marcus did not raise his voice. He asked one question: who's the smallest name attached to this? And Prewitt slid over a thin folder, and in that folder was a scholarship kid, an ex-boyfriend, a plankton. Marcus looked at the folder for maybe 4 seconds. Then he said the sentence that ended him, though he'd have laughed if you'd told him so. Make him the story. Lean on the mother if he gets loud. 4 seconds. That's what my family was worth to that man, 4 seconds and a shrug. I've decided to make those the most expensive 4 seconds of his life. Everything after this is just the invoice arriving. And when his people pulled the redemption records to see who'd been cashing Meridian winners, they found a pattern. Staggered, structured, careful. Juno's work was good, but a pattern all the same. Threaded through with one recurring name that a competent investigator could eventually knot to a shoebox. A scholarship kid. Sienna's Plankton X. The boy who'd handed her the loud ticket in the first place. I'd built my exit out of the one man's mistake. He was about to try to build his out of me. The first hit landed on a Tuesday. Juno saw it before I did. She had alerts on all our redemption accounts, and she called me. And Juno does not call. Juno texts in fragments, so when my phone actually rang, I knew the temperature had dropped. They froze it, she said. All of it. Every account. There's a hold notice. It says, suspected coordinated retail fraud. Castle, they're not calling you a lucky kid. They're calling you a syndicate. Let me tell you what it feels like to have a story you didn't write suddenly wrap around you. The commission, fed a narrative from somewhere upstream, had decided that the impossible density of Meridian winners was the work of an organized ticket fraud ring. And the connective tissue of that ring, the face they could actually put a name to, was a 17-year-old scholarship student. Not Meridian. Not the printer bleeding a state contract. Me, the victim of the defect, dressed up as its author. It's a beautiful piece of work, honestly. I can admire a thing while it's trying to bury me, point the review at the smallest, poorest, most disposable person in the whole chain, and let everyone's instincts do the rest. Because who's easier to believe as a criminal than a kid whose folder says waived? Then came the second hit, the one that wasn't about money, the one aimed at the soft part. They came for my mother. The forged debt, the wall of shells, my father's stolen signature, the thing I'd been quietly starving for a year, went from dormant to loud overnight. A collections action, then a lien. Then, when my mother did the thing she does and tried to fight it with facts and paperwork like the honest actuary she is, an escalation to something with a court date, and, God help us, a warrant, because somewhere in the forged stack was a forged missed appearance. And a forged missed appearance is a real arrest. They took her on a Thursday morning. I was at school. I found out from a neighbor's text with 3 exclamation points and no capital letters, the grammar of someone shaking. I want to be honest about that morning because if I skip it, none of the cold I promised you later means anything. I did not stay cold. I stood in the Whitmore hallway with my phone in my hand and the marble floor going soft under me. And for about 90 seconds, I was not a strategist or a coward or a boy with a shoebox. I was a 14-year-old watching his mother do finger math under the table. Except now the table was a booking desk. Marcus Ashcroft had reached across 4 shell companies and a printing press and a lottery commission and put his hand directly on the one thing I'd built the entire plan to: protect. And then I remembered what Juno had said in the blue light of the vending machine. When it's her, come get me. I'll be the cold one for both of us. So I called her. I didn't say much. I didn't have to. She said, "Where are you?" And then, "Don't do anything. Don't post. Don't email. Don't call the commission. Don't call a Marlowe. Don't do one single reactive thing. Go stand in the parking lot. I'm coming." And she came. She left class, walked out of Whitmore in the middle of 4th period like it was nothing, found me in the lot and did not hug me. Because Juno is not a hugger, she is a fixer. She stood next to me, close, shoulder almost to shoulder, and she said, "Okay, here's what's true. Your mom is scared right now, and that's real, and it's the worst part, and we're going to fix it. And here's the other thing that's true, and I need you to hold both. He just made the biggest mistake of his life, and he doesn't know it yet. He arrested my mother," I said. "He put it in writing," she said. "All of it. Castle, think. You couldn't subpoena Ashcroft Holdings. You're a kid with a notebook. A kid with a notebook can't make Marcus Ashcroft's machine generate sworn documents connecting him to Meridian and to a forged loan on the public record. But an angry Marcus Ashcroft, swatting a plankton, will generate every single one of those documents himself. He's not attacking you, he's filling out our evidence for us, in triplicate and signing it." I looked at her. The floor came back under my feet. "He reached into the light to hit me," I said, slowly, the magic eye poster snapping into focus one more time. "And now we can see his hand," she said. "I want to tell you I stayed rational, but there was a night that week I didn't. 3 days in, my mother out on bail and not sleeping, jumping at the mail. An actuary who'd spent her life measuring risk now unable to sit with her back to a window. And I sat on the floor of my room with the backpack open and the coal in my hand. The jackpot. $1.2 million, one scratch away. Enough, right now, tonight, to hire a wall of lawyers, to make the debt somebody else's problem, to buy my mother a night's sleep. My thumb was on the foil. I could have ended her fear in 90 seconds. I texted Juno a photo of my thumb on the ticket. No words, she called in 11 seconds. Put it down, she said. No hello, she's not sleeping, Juno. I know. Put it down. Castle, listen to me. If you scratch that now, as a minor, in a panic, in the middle of an open fraud investigation with your name on it, you don't save your mom, you hand Marcus the last brick he needs. Scholarship kid connected to the ticket ring suddenly produces $1 million jackpot the week his fraud case opens. You'd be scratching a confession. He wants you to reach for it. It's the whole reason he squeezed her. He's not trying to beat you. He's trying to make you flinch at the wrong second. Because that's the only way he wins. Her voice dropped. And the fixer went quiet, and the person came through for exactly one sentence. I told you I'd be the cold one when it was her. This is me being it, put it down. We are so close. Don't let him buy your flinch for $1 million when it's about to be worth so much more. I put it down. I put the coal back in the lining of the backpack, and I put my forehead on the cold floor, and I stayed there until the flinch passed. That phone call is the reason this is a victory story and not a cautionary one. Everybody focuses on the reveal at the end. The reveal was never the hard part. That was the hard part, a thumb on the foil at 2 a.m. And I didn't win it alone. Here is where a lesser story would have me break. And I want to explain why I didn't. Because it's the whole spine. The pile on that week was total. Whitmore suspended me pending the investigation. A scholarship kid accused of fraud is a scholarship kid whose scholarship suddenly discovers a morality clause. The betting pool in Dorian's group chat paid out. Someone had guessed jail before June and collected. Sienna, sensing which way the wind blew and needing badly to be on the winning side of a story again, posted a tearful little video about how she'd always felt something was off about me, how she was just so glad she got out when she did, how her mother had warned her about boys like that. Plankton, but make it prophetic. Dorian reposted it with a single word, called it. The whole school, which had spent 2 years looking through me, finally looked directly at me, and what they decided to see was a criminal. And I let them. That's the part people find hardest to believe. I didn't defend myself. I didn't post a rebuttal or corner a teacher or beg the commission for a hearing. Because a cornered kid protesting his innocence is exactly the picture Marcus needed. Loud, reactive, guilty-looking, easy to bury. The most dangerous thing I could do to that man was nothing. Nothing. While his own machine kept spitting out paper. Nothing, while every filing his lawyers made to sink me quietly notarized the connection between Ashcroft Holdings, Meridian Print, and a forged loan. Nothing, while the plankton drifted, patient, toward the bottom of the ocean where the whole weight was going to come to rest. The town made it easy to stay quiet by being so loud. Mr. Halverson, who'd written my recommendation letter the year before, now crossed the hall to avoid me and got very interested in a bulletin board whenever I passed. A boy named Teo, who'd sat next to me in physics for 2 years and copied my labs, unfollowed me and then, to be safe, blocked me, as if fraud were airborne. The neighbor with the 3 exclamation point text stopped waving. Even Okafor's booth got complicated not from him, never from him, but a regular muttered something at the counter about letting that kid sit here, and Okafor said, evenly. Without looking up, he has bought a coffee every day for 2 years. When you have done anything for 2 years, you may have an opinion about my booth. And the man left, and I loved that tired king with my whole chest. But I stopped going as often anyway, because I would rather miss the booth than turn it into a headline. Meanwhile, Sienna and Dorian took a victory lap around a race nobody had finished. Picture them at a rooftop thing that weekend, her in something new and financed, him in linen. The two of them filming a little content set to a sad girl song about growth. So grateful for the red flags that saved me, she captioned it. And Dorian, arm around her like a lease agreement, added his one word again, called it. And they toasted to their own foresight over a view her family couldn't afford, and his family had probably foreclosed on somebody to build. They thought they were standing on a summit. They were standing on the exact spot the tide was about to reach first. I watched the video twice, not because it hurt, it did a little, I'm not a robot, but because I wanted to remember the specific angle of Dorian's smile, so I'd recognize the before and the after. It costs something to look guilty on purpose while everyone you know decides you're trash. I'm not going to pretend it didn't, I ate that. I've eaten worse for less. The suspension had a hearing because Whitmore likes its cruelties to look procedural. I sat in a paneled room in front of 3 administrators and a lawyer the school had retained the way you retain an exterminator. And they read the commission's syndicate language aloud like it was already a conviction, and they asked me to respond. Every instinct I had wanted to respond. I had the whole thing in my head, the foil, the defect, the return address, the fact that I was the victim of the exact fraud they were pinning on me. I could have detonated it right there on the table, I said. I understand, and nothing else. Because, here's the cold read, anything I said in that room went straight to Pruitt within the hour. and a defense heard early is a defense you can prepare against. The commission's real auditors hadn't opened our envelope yet. If I showed my hand to a school lawyer to save a semester, I'd be trading the whole war for a battle. So I sat there and let 3 adults decide I was a criminal, and I said I understand. And I watched them mistake my silence for guilt, which is what I needed them to do. One person in that building didn't. Mr. Deng, who ran the math department and had watched me demolish every ceiling he could find for 2 years, stood up at the back of that hearing uninvited, out of turn, and said, to a room that outranked him, "I have taught this boy for 2 years. He does not cut corners. He finds better corners. Whatever this is, you have it backwards." They thanked him coldly and asked him to sit. He sat, but he found me afterward in the emptying hall and said, "Quiet. I don't know what you're doing. I know you're doing something, and I know it's not what they said." He pressed a folded paper into my hand, a name, a legal aid contact, a man who does not lose to money, and said, "For your mother. Don't argue." I didn't argue. I added Mr. Deng to the short page, the Protect Don't Process page, right under Juno and Okafor. The list of people who didn't laugh keeps getting longer the further down you fall, which tells you something about who's worth knowing. You find your real ones at the bottom. Nobody meets a true friend at a rooftop party. The one I didn't have to be cold in front of was Juno, and this is where I tell you she passed the test I hadn't meant to give her. When you're the accused kid's friends evaporate. That's just physics. Standing near me that week cost real social capital, and Juno had spent 2 years with almost none to spare. She spent it anyway. She showed up. Every day of the suspension, she was on my porch with her laptop and 2 energy drinks building. She got my mother a lawyer, a real one, a shark who owed a favor to somebody Juno had helped, because of course Juno banks favors like the rest of us collect grudges. And that lawyer got the bail sorted and my mother home by Sunday, shaking thinner, but home at her good lamp, holding my face in her hands and saying, "What is happening, Cass? What is happening?" And me saying, "I'm handling it, Mom. I promise I'm handling it," which was the first fully true sentence I'd said to her in a year. The days after the bail were the worst of it, and I want them here so the cold I promised later doesn't come free. My mother, who had measured risk for a living for 20 years, could no longer sit with her back to a door. She flinched at the mail. She'd wake at 3, and I'd hear her in the kitchen not making noise, just sitting, an actuary whose own numbers had been forged out from under her, learning the specific horror of being punished precisely for being honest. She kept asking me if we should just pay it, settle, disappear, make it stop, and every cell in my body wanted to say yes, to end her fear that night, and I couldn't. Because paying it was the flinch, paying it was the confession, paying it fed the machine. So I lied to her by omission every single day that week. I told her I was handling it and let her think I meant lawyers and patience, and I did not tell her that her 17-year-old was running a cold war against the man who'd built her nightmare, because the truth would have made her try to stop me, and her trying to stop me was the one thing that could get us both killed. Protecting your mother sometimes looks exactly like lying to her face. I've made my peace with a lot of things, that one still has a splinter in it. That night, after she slept, Juno and I sat on the porch and built the thing. The dossier, the case file the notebook had always secretly wanted to grow up to be. We had the ticket data, 2 years of it, the defect graphed and dated, which on its own proved the Meridian series was printing readable winners, which on its own was a scandal. We had Juno's registry map, Meridian to holding company to Ashcroft, the same mail drop above the same nail salon that the forged loan had crawled out of. And now, courtesy of Marcus himself, we had the fresh paper, the collection's filings, the lien, the commission's own syndicate theory, every sworn document his lawyers had generated to sink me, each one a brick pulled from his own foundation, and helpfully stamped with his address. He'd wanted to write my ending. He'd written his own deposition instead. We didn't send it to one place. Juno was firm about that. A single recipient can be pressured, bought, or buried, and Marcus Ashcroft could buy a lot. So we made copies. One went to the Lottery Commission's actual integrity unit. The real one, the humorless auditors who exist specifically to catch a printer skimming a state contract and who would be delighted to learn the syndicate they'd been chasing, was a defrauded kid, and the real fraud was the vendor. One went to a prosecutor Juno's shark lawyer respected, a woman with a reputation for enjoying a rich defendant. And one went to a business reporter who'd been trying and failing for 3 years to prove that Ashcroft Holdings was a wall of shells, and who was about to be handed the whole blueprint gift-wrapped by 2 17-year-olds. I sealed the last envelope on the porch a little after 2 in the morning. Juno watched me do it and said, "You know what happens now, right? Once these land, it's not ours anymore. It moves at the speed of institutions, weeks, maybe months. It's going to feel like nothing is happening for a long time." "Good," I said. "Let it feel like nothing. He's better at loud than we are. We're better at nothing." She almost smiled. In the porch light, her face did the thing it does about once a month, the 1-degree thaw, and she said, "You held it together this week," when it was her. "I thought you'd crack. And I had a whole plan for when you did and you didn't. Beat, I'm updating my model of you." "Is that a compliment?" "It's data," she said, and stood and hit me on the shoulder with the empty energy drink can and walked off toward the bus stop. And I sat on the porch with 3 sealed envelopes and my mother asleep behind the door, and the entire Ashcroft empire quietly, unknowingly, waiting on the far end of a fuse I'd just finished laying. Everyone in that town went to bed that night, sure they knew how this ended. The commission was sure it had its syndicate. Marcus was sure he'd swatted a fly. Sienna was sure she'd dodged a bullet. And Dorian was sure of whatever Dorian is ever sure of, which is nothing that requires a second thought. The whole board had decided the plankton was done. The plankton had just mailed the ocean floor to 3 separate institutions. Now we waited for the tide. Institutions move slow, right up until the second they move all at once. For 5 weeks, nothing. Then the tide came in sideways and took the whole beach with it. The first thing that broke was the syndicate. The Commission's integrity unit, the real auditors, the humorless ones in the beige office who exist specifically to catch a vendor skimming a state contract, opened the folder we'd mailed them, looked at 2 years of graft defects, and did the thing auditors live for. They stopped chasing the story they'd been handed and started following the money. And the money did not lead to a scholarship kid. It led straight up the foil, into Meridian Print, into the skim, into the mail drop above the nail salon, into Ashcroft Holdings. Within a month, they weren't investigating a ticket ring. They were raiding a printer. I found out the way I find out everything now. Juno, mid-morning, 1 word, raid. They'd walked into Meridian with warrants and walked out with servers. The impossible density of winners the analyst had flagged wasn't a syndicate of teenagers. It was a company bleeding a public contract so sloppily it had left a readable defect on the actual product. And every winning ticket in that series was, technically, the printer confessing in foil. I'd spent 2 years reading that confession. It just took the state a little longer. My accounts unfroze on a Tuesday. The hold notice that had called me a coordinated retail fraud was replaced, with no apology and no ceremony, by a line that said no adverse findings. That's it. That's the whole exoneration a poor kid gets. But I didn't need the ceremony. I framed the notice. I actually framed it. It's on my wall. Because no adverse findings is a beige government way of saying the plankton was clean the whole time and you were all wrong about him. I'm sentimental about the strangest documents. With the freeze gone, the 99 came home. All those middling winners I'd cashed clean and staggered over a year. The ones the syndicate theory had tried to reframe as loot. Every one of them stood up under a real audit as exactly what it was. Legitimate, small, unremarkable. Juno consolidated the whole quiet pile into the structure she'd been building since the first placement in the windowless club. And for the first time, we could see the number without a shoebox in front of it. It wasn't the jackpot yet. The coal was still cooling for the claim window. It was the boring 100 times patience of a year of discipline. And it was enough to do the one thing we'd been waiting to do the day the empire started selling itself for parts. Make the first real move. Juno placed the fund's first serious position. Not a car, not a chain, not a single broke kid with money mistake, a quiet, lawyered stake in exactly the kind of distressed paper an audited empire sheds when it's bleeding. We were small. We were 18 and 19 with a spreadsheet. But we were early, and we were right. And early and right is the only edge that has ever mattered, and we'd taught ourselves both. The second thing that broke was the debt. When the integrity unit and Juno's prosecutor started pulling the Ashcroft shell wall apart to build the Meridian case, the whole structure came with it. Because that's the thing about a wall of shells, you can't demolish one company without the 200 sharing its foundation coming down. And loaded into that foundation was a forged loan with my father's stolen signature on it. The one that had buried my mother, the one that had put her in a booking room on a Thursday morning. It turns out that once a prosecutor is already reading a man's fraudulent paper for one crime, she gets curious about the rest of it. The loan was exposed as a forgery. The lien evaporated. The warrant, the forged missed appearance. The thing that had let them arrest an honest actuary for the crime of being poor and targeted was voided, and the arrest expunged. A court, in language that made my mother put her hand over her mouth, entered a finding that she had been the victim of a manufactured debt from the start. She read that finding at the Good Lamp twice, because she still didn't trust good news. And then she looked up at me, and I watched an actuary do a piece of math she'd never been able to solve, how a debt that had grown like a tumor for 4 years had simply in a single week ceased to exist. And I saw her land on the one variable that didn't fit. Me, standing there too calm, too unsurprised. "Castle," she said, "what did you do?" "I'll tell you everything," I said. "Soon, I promise. Just not tonight. Tonight, just be a person who doesn't owe anyone anything for the first time in 4 years. You've earned one night of that before you have to hear the whole story. She didn't push. She's smarter than me, and she knew there was a story, and she chose the night. She cried a little, the quiet kind. The kind that's mostly relief. And I made her tea and didn't do the math with my fingers, because for the first time in a very long time there was no math left to do. The full reveal to her, the it was me, Mom, all of it, since I was 15. I'm still saving that. It's the single most valuable thing I own, and I'm going to spend it exactly right. But the debt was dead, and she was home, and no one was ever putting hands on her again. 2 of the 4 things I'd built the whole plan to do were done. Then I turned 18. The timing wasn't luck, I told you. There's no luck in this. It was the calendar I'd been building around for a year. Within the claim window of age, cleared of all charges, with Juno's shark lawyer at my shoulder and the calmest face in the state, I walked into the lottery office and finally scratched the coal. I want to slow down on that room because I'd rehearsed it in my head for 2 years and it was smaller and grayer than the version I'd built. Fluorescent light, a counter with a scratched acrylic shield. A clerk named her badge said Deborah, who processed jackpots the way Okafor pours coffee, one more time in a life of them. The lawyer stood at my shoulder saying nothing, which is what you pay a good lawyer for. And I took the coal out of the lining of the backpack where it had ridden for over a year, warm from being carried, the single most valuable object I'd ever touched. And I scratched it, finally in the last place on earth that felt like a lottery instead of a plan. I already knew what it said. I'd read The Shadow years ago. But there's a difference between reading The Shadow and watching the number come up under your own thumbnail. And my hand was not quite steady, and I let it not be. Because that was the one moment in the whole story I'd earned the right to feel. Deborah ran it. Then she ran it again, because clerks always run a jackpot twice. The second time is for them, a small private ceremony they're allowed. $1.2 million. She looked up at me, 18, gray hoodie, a lawyer at my shoulder, and a face like a frozen lake, and she said, "Congratulations," in the flat, tired voice of a woman who has said it to 100 luckier-looking people. And it was the most honest congratulations I ever got. Because Deborah didn't know or care what it had cost, she just certified that it was mine. Legitimate, clean, claimed in daylight by an adult with no adverse findings, documented to the last decimal. I signed where she pointed. The lawyer countersigned. The most dangerous document of my life became the most boring one. A form in a beige office filed. Sienna had scratched her ticket for a party. I scratched mine for a verdict in a government building with a lawyer and a paper trail and a face like a frozen lake. Same series, same foil. She got a napkin and a leased car and a rooftop video about growth. I got 7 figures and the moral high ground and a receipt the whole world was about to read. Because it did become public. A minor scholarship kid falsely accused of a lottery fraud ring, fully exonerated. Who then turns 18 and legally claims a $1.2 million jackpot from the exact series the actual criminals were skimming. That's not a beige office story anymore. That's a story with a headline. Juno's reporter, who by now had the whole Ashcroft blueprint we'd gift-wrapped him, ran it as part of a series, and the internet did what the internet does with a poor kid who was right the whole time while rich people called him Plankton. Which brings me to Sienna, and the specific shade her face went when the math finally reached her. She'd been so sure. She'd amputated me for $50,000, and then, when the story turned, she'd amputated me again for social safety, posted the tearful red flags video, taken her rooftop victory lap. And now the town was reading a headline that said the Plankton had been sitting on a fortune and a clean record the entire time she was calling him a criminal for content. Her $50,000, incidentally, was long gone, half evaporated into a leased car and manifestation dinners, and the rest tangled up and clawed back when her showy Meridian ticket got swept into the same series investigation. Her false "I found it myself" claim now a small, ugly footnote in a large, ugly case. She ended the whole adventure with a repossessed car, a footnote, and a boyfriend who was about to become a headline of his own. Her face, when a friend showed her the article in the Whitmore courtyard, the same courtyard where she'd called me Plankton, went the gray of a scratched-off ticket with nothing under the foil. I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. Enough people filmed it. She read the headline, and you could watch the number arrive in her eyes in real time. Not 50,000, the actual number. The 1.5 million with a record clean enough to frame, and you could watch her understand, all at once, that she hadn't traded up. She'd handed a boy the clear road to a fortune, signed a napkin proving she'd tried to take it from him for $1, and filmed herself doing it. She'd been so busy performing the win that she never once checked whether she'd actually won. And then the napkin came home to roost. Somebody, and I will go to my grave insisting it wasn't me, though I will not insist very hard, dug up the pool party footage. The dollar, the laugh, the napkin. But now, run alongside the headline, The video read completely differently. It wasn't a poor boyfriend getting a funny dollar anymore. It was a girl on camera pressuring a minor into signing away his share of a lottery win for $1, filming it and captioning it his half. The clip went from a joke at my expense to Exhibit A at hers, and it traveled millions of views, the kind of numbers that follow a person into every job interview and first date for the rest of their life. The comments were a natural disaster. She'd built her whole self out of being watched, and now she was being watched doing the single worst thing anyone had ever caught her doing, on loop, forever. Remember when she called me plankton? Remember I said it would age like milk? Here's the payoff. The most liked comment on the most viral version of that video, the one that got screenshotted onto every feed, just said, "Imagine calling a guy plankton and finding out he owned the whole ocean." She gave me that word to hurt me, and the internet handed it back to her sharpened. I didn't write that comment either. I didn't have to. When you do the work, the crowd writes your one-liners for free. Dorian's exit was the fastest thing I have ever seen a human being do. The golden boy had attached himself to Sienna for the windfall story, and the second the story curdled. The second dating the girl from the dollar video became a liability instead of an accessory. He was gone. Not a conversation, not a text back. He simply stopped appearing in her posts, unfollowed in the night like Teo unfollowing me, and surfaced 8 days later at a different party with a different girl and the same linen shirt, because a boy like Dorian doesn't have relationships. He has seasons, and Sienna's season was over the instant it stopped making him look good. She'd thrown away a real thing for a prince, and the prince turned out to be a boy who collects other people's good luck the way some kids collect sneakers and throws it out just as fast. She had, in the end, correctly identified exactly one person in this whole story who would use her and discard her. She'd just aimed the accusation at the wrong boy. But Dorian bailing on Sienna is a footnote, because Dorian had a much bigger problem arriving by certified mail, and so did his father. This is the part where I get to explain the scale, and I've been looking forward to it. While the Ashcroft Empire was cracking the Meridian Raid, the Prosecutor, the Reporter series, the Shell Wall coming down brick by public brick, its assets started doing what assets do around a sinking company. They went up for sale, fast and cheap, in the panicked way that distressed things sell. A holding company under investigation can't hold. Creditors called, partners fled. And all those pieces of the Ashcroft portfolio, the buildings and the land and the paper, hit the market at fire sale prices, snatched up by a quiet, well-lawyered, boring little investment vehicle nobody had heard of, whose principals preferred not to be named. You already know whose vehicle it was. 100 tickets, 99 clean winners, 1 jackpot, structured and grown and lawyered up over a year of 2 underdogs and a spreadsheet. The fund, it had a real name now and a real attorney and a real strategy. And its strategy, when the empire that forged my mother's debt started selling itself for parts, was very simple. Buy the parts. Quietly, legally. All of them we could reach. And here's the piece I saved for last, because it's the one that still makes me laugh in a way I'm slightly ashamed of. Whitmore Academy, the school that waived my tuition and then suspended me the second a rich man called me a criminal, did not own the ground it stood on. The land under the academy, the endowment that funded it, had been an Ashcroft holding for a decade. It was one of the distressed pieces that came up in the fire sale, and a quiet, boring, well-lawyered little fund with 2 unnamed teenage principals bought it. I own the dirt under the school that suspended me. I own the ground under the courtyard where she called me plankton. The scholarship kid whose folder said waived holds the paper on the whole institution that looked through him for 2 years. And there were so many pieces, so many buildings and lots and shells cascading down at once, that by the end even Juno's spreadsheet stopped naming them individually and just started grouping them. The way you stop counting stars and start counting constellations, they faded into the dark under a single line item. That's the scale I promised you. That's the 100 times the threat. She fought me for $50,000. I ended up holding the ground her whole world was standing on, and she never felt the floor change owners under her feet. Marcus, meanwhile, got his 4 seconds back with interest. The man who'd looked at my family's file for 4 seconds and said make him the story was now himself, the story indicted, frozen. His glass office 40 floors up now, a liability he was trying to sell. His lawyer Pruitt very suddenly billing by the hour on a defense instead of an offense. The empire that owned the building my dentist rents was being audited down to the studs. The Reporter series is what made it real to the town. Because a beige, no adverse findings notice changes a file and a front-page byline changes a life. He ran it in 3 parts. Part 1 was the printer and the skim estate lottery contract bled for a decade. Told plainly enough that even people who skipped the business section understood a rich man had been stealing from the same public that buys tickets on bad weeks hoping for $2 of hope. Part 2 was the shell wall, the mail drop above the nail salon, the forged loans, my mother's among them, unnamed but unmistakable to anyone who knew us. An honest professional buried under a manufactured debt to keep her quiet. Part 3 was the kid. Falsely accused, cleared, and the whole time the actual victim of the printer's defect. He didn't use my name at my request. He called me the student the state nearly prosecuted for surviving Ashcroft's mistake. I've never been described better. I've never paid for a description I liked more, and I didn't pay for that one at all. The morning Part 3 ran. I watched the town flip in real time, and it was uglier and more honest than any apology. The same people who'd shared the Plankton video now shared the expose with captions like, "I always thought something was off about how they treated that boy." People who had, in fact, thought no such thing. Who'd laughed on cue in a courtyard. I didn't correct them. Let them rewrite their own memories. The record was fixed where it counted, in a prosecutor's file and a framed notice on my wall, and the crowd's version of history was never the one I was writing for. Vivian's collapse had a specific texture I'll give you, because she'd built the whole storefront and she deserves to be seen going dark. The $50,000 had been the bridge loan under everything the spring covered. The summer promised. The lease payments floated against a windfall that was supposed to keep coming. When Sienna's Meridian ticket got swept into the series investigation and the clawback hit, the bridge fell, and every rented thing crossed it at once on the way down. The leased sedan went first, repossessed from the driveway on a Tuesday in full view of the neighbors Vivienne had spent a decade out dressing. Then the second mortgage got called. Then the house, the staged, financed, always for show house, went on the market at the bank's insistence, with Vivienne's good taste still hanging on the walls it no longer owned. A woman who had turned every dollar into the appearance of 10 watched the trick run backwards, $10 of appearance collapsing into one of reality, and there was no more honey left to catch anything with. Marlowe's moved into a rental across the county line, a real one, unstaged, small, and Vivienne stopped posting entirely, which for her was a kind of death. The storefront finally dark, the flash long gone, nobody left to perform wealth for. And Marcus, I said men like Marcus don't do perp walks, and I was wrong, which is one of the few things in this story I got wrong and enjoyed being wrong about. He did one. Not a dramatic one. White-collar arrests are quiet. A man in a good coat walking into a federal building flanked by lawyers instead of walking out of a glass tower, flanked by nothing he had to think about. But the cameras were there because the reporter's series had made him a name. And there's a photo of Marcus Ashcroft that ran everywhere. Mid-step, coat perfect, face doing the one thing that face had never had to do in 60 years of owning buildings. Calculating. Reading the shadow under his own foil. Understanding, 4 seconds too late and a decade too deep, that the smallest name attached to this had turned out to be the one holding the whole thread. I printed that photo. It's not on my wall, I'm not that guy, but it's in a drawer. And on the rare bad day when being 17 feels harder than foil, I take it out and remember that 4 seconds and a shrug bought that man exactly the future he built. Dorian's future, the effortless one. The one where you sling an arm around a teacher and get an extension. The one that runs entirely on a father's name. Got zeroed out the day that name became a search warrant. Vivienne's storefront went dark. The leased car gone, the second mortgage called, the rented sense of taste repossessed along with everything it had been renting. The whole photograph of Rich, Flash, finally dead. And me? I watched. That's the part I want you to sit with because it's the rule under all the rules. Through the raid and the reversal and the reveal and the fire sale, I didn't gloat, I didn't post, I didn't send a single "How do you like me now?" I just watched it happen. Cold and quiet, from a booth I'd started visiting again now that the headlines had turned, with a coffee Okafor still wouldn't always let me pay for. Next to a girl who'd read me right from the first ticket. Juno, by the way, was named co-principal of the fund the day it went legitimate equal, on the paper, in ink. Her name next to mine on the thing that now owned the ground under the school that once called her a charity case. It wasn't a grand romantic gesture, it was an org chart. But she read her name on that document, and she did the 1-degree thaw, and she said, Vale and Rayner, alphabetical. I win, and I said, we both win. And she said, obviously, I just win first. And that is the most married two people have ever sounded without either of them managing to say a single real thing. And I wouldn't trade it for a warmer scene. The cascade was almost done. The empire was rubble, the debt was dead, my mother was free, the girl was on the paper, and the whole town that had decided the plankton was finished was now refreshing the same headline over and over. There was just one loose end left. One person who hadn't yet had to sit across a table from what she threw away and say the word out loud. Before I get to her, though, let me clear the smaller debts off the board, because the cascade paid out a lot of little invoices that week, and I promised you I settle in full. Whitmore Academy discovered its conscience roughly 11 minutes after it discovered who held the paper on its land. The suspension, the one they'd slapped on me the instant a rich man called me a fraud, morality clause and all, got reversed in a letter so fast and so gracious it practically apologized for existing. The headmaster, a man named Prentice, who had never once learned my name in 2 years, suddenly knew it very well. He called my mother personally, used the word regrettable 4 times in one call, and floated the idea of an assembly to celebrate Castle's exoneration. I declined the assembly. I've been the entertainment at enough Whitmore gatherings, but I did enjoy watching an institution that had looked through me for 2 years learn to make eye contact the same week it found out its ground had a new owner. Funny how the vision clears. The crawlback was its own quiet comedy. Halverson, who'd gotten so interested in bulletin boards whenever I passed, materialized at my locker to tell me he'd always known there was more to the story. A man who had unwritten his own recommendation letter in his head, now retroactively writing himself back into my corner. Tio unblocked me and sent a "You congrats man, we should catch up," as if we'd drifted apart over a scheduling conflict, and not his decision that fraud was airborne. The neighbor with the 3 exclamation points started waving again, harder than before, overcorrecting. I was polite to all of them. Cold, but polite. I'd learned the exact value of people who leave when they think you have nothing. Okafor taught me. 1 coffee, 1 sermon. And the value doesn't go back up just because they came back. They labeled themselves. You don't unsee a label. The backer collapse came next, and it was the prettiest domino of them all. Marcus Ashcroft's whole defense rested on the wall holding on nobody inside the shell company turning. But a man who thinks of people as 4-second files tends to be surrounded by people who've noticed. Pruitt, the parking meter lawyer, read the prosecutor's evidence, did the math on which way the wall was falling, and did what parking meter lawyers do when the meter runs out. He cut a deal and started talking. Then a Meridian accountant facing his own exposure decided he'd rather be a witness than a defendant and handed over the skim ledger with a little bow. The empire didn't get toppled from outside so much as it got abandoned from inside. Everyone who'd propped Marcus up quietly stepping off the platform at once and letting him drop. Turns out loyalty you never paid for isn't loyalty. It's a lease, and the lease was up. Sienna tried to reach me exactly once, and I want it on the record because it's the closest thing to a face-to-face this whole story gave us before the room at the end. She found me at Okafor's, of all places, my booth, which tells you she'd asked around, which tells you it cost her something to come looking. She slid into the seat across from me, uninvited. An echo of the day Juno did the same thing, and the contrast was the entire point. Juno had sat down and asked to see the schematics. Sienna sat down and started performing. Cass. Hi, God, it's been so crazy, right? I feel like people are twisting everything, and I never meant for any of it to go the way it. And she reached for my hand across the table, the storefront reach, the one that had a napkin folded inside it the last time. I moved my coffee 2 inches to safety, the way Juno moves winners out of a spill. You wanted your honest half, I said. I signed for it. We're square. That's it. That's all she got. Not a speech, not a list of her crimes. She wasn't worth the specificity. And specificity is a gift I save for people I respect enough to itemize. She sat there for a second with her hand on the empty table, the reach with nothing to land on, and something in her face understood that the door wasn't just closed, it had never actually been ajar, and she got up and left. Okafor watched her go, then came over and topped off my coffee without a word, which is Okafor for good. And Okafor, since we're settling debts, I bought the building. His building. Strip that held Okafor's fuel and convenience had been leveraged to a landlord who'd been squeezing him for years, and the fund bought the note in the same boring sweep that took the Ashcroft lots, and I did the one loud thing I let myself do in this entire story. I walked into the back, set the deed transfer on the counter next to the register, and told the tired king that his rent was now $1 a year, payable to me. Forever. In the exact denomination somebody once handed me as a joke. He read the paper twice, the way my mother reads good news, and then he did something I'd never seen him do in 2 years. He sat down. Just sat on the stool behind his own counter, in his own building, and put his hand flat on the deed. You did not have to, he said. I told him that was the whole point. Nobody had to give me a booth either. He tapped the counter twice. End of sermon. Best dollar I'll ever collect. There was just one loose end left, the real one, the one the whole thing had been quietly bending toward from the second she handed me that bill. One person who hadn't yet had to sit across a table from what she threw away and say the word out loud. Her name was Sienna Marlowe, and she was about to fill out an application. 6 months is enough time for a fire to go out and for you to see what shape it left in the ground. I told my mother the truth on a Sunday at the Good Lamp, because I'd been saving it, and Sundays felt right. I put the notebook on the table, the ticket graphs, the page labeled invoices, the graphed foil defect from a loser she'd left on the counter 3 years earlier without ever knowing she'd handed her son a map out, and I told her all of it. The bug, the rules, the 100 tickets, the shoebox. the year of quiet cash-outs that had been eating her debt from the inside while she thought a bank had grown a heart. The coal, and the party, and the dollar, and the plan. She's an actuary. She sat very still and let me finish the whole thing without a word, because she was doing the math, and when I got to the end, she'd solved it. All of it. Every payment that had never added up, and she put both hands flat on the table the way she does with good news she doesn't trust. Then she looked at the loser ticket in the notebook, the one she'd scratched on a bad week and thrown down in defeat, and she started to laugh. And then she wasn't laughing. And she came around the table and held my face in her hands, like she had the night the debt died. Except this time she knew who to thank, and the person was her own kid, who'd been 40 since he was 14 and had spent every day of it quietly digging her out. "You carried this," she said, "for 3 years, alone at 15. Her thumb moved on my cheek. "You should have been doing homework and being sad about girls. And instead you were—" She couldn't finish it. An actuary ran out of words, which I didn't think was possible, so I finished it for her. "I was getting us out," I said. "That's all. I was just getting us out." She sat back down. She needed to, I think. And then she asked the questions in the order an actuary asks them, which is to say the order of ascending fear. How much had I risked? What would have happened if I'd been caught at 16? Whether I'd been scared, and when I said every single day, she closed her eyes for a second. Because a mother can survive her kid being in danger, but she has a harder time with her kid being scared and hiding it from her to keep her calm. She asked why I hadn't told her, and I gave her the true answer, which was that the day I told her had to be a day it was safe to know, because the moment she knew, she'd have tried to protect me, and her trying to protect me was exactly the flinch Marcus was hunting for. "You'd have marched into that commission with your paperwork and your honesty," I said. "And they'd have eaten you, because honesty is a strategy that only works in a fair fight. And this was never a fair fight." She didn't argue. She knows the odds of everything. She knew the odds of that. Then she asked the last one. Quiet. The one she'd been circling. The girl, Sienna. The dollar. She'd seen the video like everyone had. "Did you know? When you handed her that ticket a month before, did you already know what she was?" "I suspected," I said. "I wanted to be wrong. I gave her a real chance to be a good person with $50,000, and she showed me exactly who she was on camera for free. That's not me being cruel, Mom. That's me finally believing what someone kept telling me about themselves." My mother looked at me for a long moment, and then she said the thing that I think about more than any line in this whole story. "More than no adverse findings, more than please," she said. "I'm proud of what you did. I need you to hear a harder thing too. Don't get good at this. You just spent 3 years learning to be colder than a grown man who ruined families for a living, and you beat him. And I will never stop being grateful. But cold is a tool, Castle, and a boy who only owns one tool starts using it on everything." She put her hand over mine. "You won. Now put it down. Be warm at somebody on purpose. Start with the girl in the club who kept you human. Because she did, I can tell. And she's going to matter more than the money." I didn't tell my mother it was too much weight for a kid to have carried because she already knew, and saying it wouldn't have set it down. She didn't scold me for the risk, though there'd been plenty. She just held on. And after a while, she said the thing I'll keep longer than the 1.2 million. "Okay, you got us out. Now you're allowed to be 17. You're a little late, start anyway." And I did. Slowly. I'm still learning it. Turns out being 17 is harder than reading foil, and I'm worse at it, and that's fine. The fund was real by then, real in the way things become real when they have letterhead and lawyers and a name on the door. Vale and Rayner. Alphabetical, as the co-principal never stopped reminding me. It held the boring, distressed pieces of a fallen empire, and it grew quietly, because 2 people who'd taught themselves to read shadows under foil turned out to be pretty good at reading shadows everywhere else too. We didn't get loud with it. No cars, no chains, none of the broke kid with money mistakes I'd promised myself I'd never make. My mother kept her job because she loves it. The debt being dead didn't change that she likes measuring risk. She just gets to do it now without measuring her own. We stayed in the apartment a while longer, then moved somewhere with a window that got the morning sun, because that was the one thing she said she wanted. Light in the kitchen, and I could finally buy her a room full of it. Okafor was thriving, and I checked on that more often than I checked on the Ashcrofts, because it mattered more. The tired king ran his own building now, rent $1 a year, and he'd use the breathing room to do the things he'd never had margin for. He fixed the dead pumps, put in a real coffee machine, hired a kid for the night shift so he could finally sleep, and the store somehow got busier the month he stopped being squeezed. I still took the back booth. He still waved off my money. One afternoon he slid a coffee across and said, "You know the funny thing? 20 years I thought the trick was to work harder. It was never that. The trick was one person deciding I was not a thing to squeeze. He tapped the counter twice. End of sermon. You were a boy who bought a coffee and made no trouble. I gave you a booth. That is the whole return on my investment. Best portfolio advice I ever got, and it came from a man who'd never once call it that. The Ashcrofts, by contrast, were a smoking foundation. Marcus was deep in a prosecution that had stopped being about lottery foil and started being about a decade of everything. The kind of case that ends careers and starts documentaries. The glass office 40 floors up belonged to a receiver now. Prewitt had talked his way into a smaller cell. And Dorian, the golden boy whose entire operating system was his father's name, discovered what that name was worth once it became a search term, which is to say less than nothing, a debt of its own. He'd transferred out of Whitmore by spring, gone to whatever school takes a boy whose only skill was being an Ashcroft, in the years when that meant something. Last I heard, he was telling a new crowd it was all a witch hunt, which is what men say when the paperwork is real. And the Marlowes fell out of the photograph entirely. Vivienne's storefront couldn't survive the video and the collapse of the $50,000 bridge loan her whole spring had been financed against. The lease everything strategy works right up until one season goes wrong, and then every rented thing gets repossessed in the same month: the car, the house, the sense of taste. All of it recalled at once, like a body rejecting an organ it never actually owned. They didn't have the money for Whitmore anymore, and more than that, they didn't have the name for it. A school that had just learned to make careful eye contact with me was not about to keep the family from the dollar video on its roster. The Marlowes were, in the polite language of institutions, not returning in the fall. I heard about Sienna's actual life in fragments, the way you hear about anyone once they stop being the main character. She got a job she had to. The rented world was gone at a chain cafe 2 towns over, far enough that the apron and the name tag wouldn't be seen by anyone who used to hold her phone for her. I know that specific cafe because Juno mentioned it once. Flat, no gloat, just a data point. She's at the Bean Ledger on Route 12. Weekday mornings. She'd have died before working a service job in the old life. She'd called that exact kind of work charity case adjacent once, to my face, about a classmate. Now she wore the visor. The video followed her there. Of course, it follows her everywhere. That's the nature of a thing with millions of views, and every so often a customer would clock the face, do the recognition blink, and she'd watch them decide whether to say something. Most didn't. The not saying was worse. She'd built a self entirely out of being watched, and now she was watched in the one way she couldn't perform against, pitied, quietly, over a register. I want to be clear that I felt nothing tidy about this. Not glee, not sympathy either. Mostly I felt the flat thing you feel watching whether she'd built a house on a floodplain and mocked the people on high ground, and the water came, and water doesn't have opinions. She'd done it to herself with a napkin and a laugh. I just declined to be the sandbag. There's a difference between pushing someone into the river and refusing to jump in after the person who pushed you, and I'd made my peace with living on the second side of it, which put Sienna in a very specific corner. Senior year unfinished at the only kind of school that fed into the future she'd been performing. No money. A name that auto-completed to a humiliation. And exactly one door left open, one narrow, prestigious, brutally competitive door that could get her back inside and pay her whole way through. The Vale Rayner Scholarship. We'd built it deliberately, and I'm not going to pretend the shape of it wasn't chosen. When the fund ended up holding the ground under Whitmore and the endowment that funded it, we could have done a lot of things. We could have shut the place down. I thought about it for about an hour on a bad day. Instead, we did something colder and, I think, better. We established a scholarship, a real one. Generous, life-changing, full ride, plus a stipend. The kind of thing that takes a kid whose folder says waived and lets them stop doing math with their fingers. We aimed it on purpose at the invisible ones. The scholarship kids, the charity cases, the plankton. Every applicant we'd take was some version of who Juno and I had been in that windowless club. And the fund would carry them the way nobody carried us. It was, in other words, the single most inconvenient scholarship on earth for a girl who'd built her whole self out of looking down on exactly those kids. And it was her only way back. We announced it properly, which mattered to me. Not a quiet, fun move, a real launch. With the school it was attached to, forced to stand on a stage and celebrate a scholarship funded by the ground it didn't know it no longer owned. Headmaster Prentice, the man who'd learned my name 11 minutes after he learned who held his land, gave a speech about Whitmore's proud tradition of opportunity to a room that now included the endowment's 2 anonymous principals sitting in the 3rd row in a gray hoodie and a blazer, saying nothing, letting him. Juno leaned over during the applause and murmured, "He's thanking us for saving the school from us." And I had to look at the floor to keep my face flat. The launch made the papers too, a generous new full-ride scholarship aimed at scholarship kids, established by a private fund, trustees undisclosed. And for one clean week, the same town that had shared the plankton video was sharing the news that some mystery benefactor was carrying the invisible kids, never once connecting the mystery to the plankton. I let them not connect it. The not connecting was part of the design. There was a moment when the fund went fully legitimate the day the papers were signed. The endowment formalized. Both principals' names entered into the record. And it's the closest thing this story has to the scene where the underdog gets publicly claimed. We signed at the glass table, Juno and I, and the lawyer slid the document over, and Juno signed first, of course, alphabetical, and then turned it to me. And under both our names, in printed capitals, it said the thing that a year of shadows had built toward. Principals, Val Rayner Foundation. She looked at it, then at me, and she didn't do a speech because we don't. But she put her pen down and said, "The charity case and the plankton run the endowment now. A beat. I want that on my headstone." And I said, "It'll be alphabetical." And she said, "Obviously." And that was us claiming each other in the only dialect either of us speaks. Over a legal document, in a room with no rented furniture. Nobody kissed. We're not that story. We signed a foundation into existence and argued about the order of our names, and I have never felt more chosen in my life. The application required an essay. It required specifically that the applicant make the case in writing and then in person before the fund's trustees for why they were worthy of being carried, why they deserved it. We wrote that requirement ourselves, Juno and I, at the good screen in the club room that no longer felt windowless because we'd stopped being trapped in it and started running things from it. Juno read the requirement back to me when we finished, deadpan, and said, "You realize she'll have to apply to this. There's no other door. She'll have to write an essay about why she deserves to be carried and defend it in a room to trustees she can't see the names of. Beat. You built a machine that ends with Sienna Marlowe begging a committee to be worth saving, and she'll walk into it on her own 2 feet thinking it's her lucky break." "I know," I said. "I just want to make sure you know," Juno said, "that this is the pettiest thing anyone has ever done with a 9-figure asset, and I have never respected you more." "It's not petty," I said, and I meant it. Petty would be denying her at the door. This isn't denial, it's a mirror. I'm going to give her the exact same shot at generosity she gave me, to the penny. Juno looked at me for a long moment, and then she did the full thaw, the once-a-year one, and she said, "Okay, yeah." "Okay?" And she went back to the screen, and I understood that she'd wanted to hear me say it was a mirror and not a knife, because a knife is Marcus's tool and a mirror is ours. And the whole point of this entire year was to prove we were the other kind of person. She'd been testing my model of me. I passed. Sienna applied. Of course she applied. It was her only move, and the fund's trustees were anonymous, and the scholarship was famous now, richly endowed, the ticket back inside. She had no idea that the 2 teenagers who'd founded it were the charity case she'd made cry in the atrium, and the plankton she'd bought for $1. She submitted an essay. I read it. I read every applicant's essay. That was the deal I made with myself. If I was going to hold this power, I was going to actually read. Not skim, not delegate, read. And I read hers last, the way you save the thing you have complicated feelings about for the end of the plate. It was good. I'll give her that, and giving it costs me nothing now. Sienna had always been able to perform, and an essay is a performance you get to rehearse. She wrote about hardship, carefully sanded of the specifics that would have named the video. About a difficult year. About learning who she really was when everything was taken away. About growth, that word again, always growth. She wrote that she'd learned the value of the people she'd overlooked. She did not use my name. She did not use Juno's. She wrote, in the last line, that she hoped the trustees would see past who she used to be to who she was becoming. She had no idea she was asking the 2 people she'd overlooked to see past who she used to be. She'd written her plea directly to her victims and addressed it to whom it may concern. The dramatic irony was so complete it stopped being funny and became almost solemn, like watching someone mail a letter to a house they'd burned down. The in-person defense, the committee, happened on a gray Tuesday in a conference room the fund kept downtown, glass table, good chairs, nothing rented. Juno and I sat on one side with 2 actual advisors we'd brought on. Real ones, a retired admissions dean and a financial officer. Because we were 18 and 19 and we wanted the thing to be legitimate, not a stunt. The applicants came in one at a time to make their case. We heard them all. And most of them broke my heart in the good way, kid after kid who was some earlier draft of me. Folders that said waved, eyes that did math under the table. And one by one, Juno and I looked at each other and did the thing that this whole ruined, rebuilt year had been secretly for. We said yes. Full ride, stipend, carried. We funded a girl who reminded me so much of Juno at 15 that Juno had to look at the ceiling for a second. We funded a boy who worked a gas station night shift and did his homework in the back booth, and I nearly told him I knew a good booth and didn't, because he didn't need my story. He needed the yes, and he got it. There was a girl who'd taught herself 3 years of coding from library computers because her house didn't have a machine, and who apologized twice for her essay having no achievements, And Juno cut her off mid-apology and said, "You built a portfolio on a machine you had to leave the building to use. That's the achievement. Sit down, you're getting it." And the girl cried, and Juno slid the tissues over without looking, because Juno had thought of the tissues, which is the most Juno thing in this entire story. There was a kid who'd been the primary caregiver for a sick parent since he was 13 and had a transcript full of the specific dents that a life like that leaves in a GPA, and the retired admissions dean started explaining holistic review, and I said, "We don't need the framework. I can read the transcript. I know exactly what those dents are, because I did, because I'd have had the same ones if my mother had gotten sick instead of sued." He got it. They all got it. Kid after kid who was some earlier draft of me or of Juno, and one by one we said the word nobody had said to us. Yes. And then the door opened and Sienna Marlowe walked in and saw us and stopped. I watched it hit her in 3 waves, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't watch closely because I'd earned this specific view. The first wave was social autopilot, a half-second of the old storefront smile, the one she'd walk into any room with. The second wave was recognition, the smile catching on the 2 faces at the table, the plankton and the charity case, sitting where the trustees were supposed to sit. And the third wave was the whole thing arriving at once, the way a number arrives, the full and final exchange rate. That the anonymous fortune she'd been begging for a piece of belonged to the boy she'd handed $1. That the trustees she'd written her careful essay to were the exact 2 people she'd wiped her feet on. That there had never been a lucky door, there'd only ever been a mirror, and she'd walked into it on her own 2 feet. Her face went the gray of a scratched-off ticket with nothing under the foil. I'd used that image once already in this story, about the day she found out, and I'm using it again on purpose, because some people get the same fate twice, and the second time it's earned. To her credit, and I'm capable of giving it, she didn't run. She sat down. She put her hands on the glass table. No napkin in them this time, nothing folded inside. Just a girl with a name that auto-completes to a humiliation, asking the 2 people she'd hurt to carry her, and she made her case out loud. It came apart from the rehearsed version almost immediately, because you can't perform your way through a room that already knows the ending. She talked about growth and heard how it sounded. She said she'd learned the value of people she'd overlooked to the 2 people she'd overlooked, and her voice did a thing on the word overlooked that told me she'd finally, for the first time, heard herself. Near the end, quiet, off script, she said the closest thing to a true sentence I ever got from her. "I know what I did, to both of you. I know. And I'm still asking because I don't have anywhere else to ask." And then she said the word the whole machine had been built to make her say, the word I'd been waiting for since a napkin at a pool party. "Please." I let the silence sit. I didn't gloat. I want that on the record, because a lesser version of me, the version that had a thumb on the coal at 2 a.m., the version that could have turned into Marcus if Juno hadn't been in my corner. That version would have made a speech, listed her crimes by date, enjoyed it out loud. I didn't. I just looked at her, and I felt the thing I'd promised the audience of my own life I'd feel by the end, which was almost nothing. Not triumph, not even anger anymore. Just the flat, clean quiet of a debt reaching 0. "Thank you for your application, Sienna," I said. "We've read it carefully." And then I did the only thing that fit. I reached into my jacket and I took out a single dollar bill, and I set it on the glass in front of her. Face up, smooth flat. Everyone in the room understood it. She understood it most of all. "That's your honest half," I said. "Consideration paid in full. You gave me $1's worth of a chance once on camera, and told me it was everything I deserved. So here's yours, to the penny." The applications decided. Her scholarship line stayed empty. Every other name in that room got carried. Hers got exactly the $1 she'd once decided a person like me was worth, returned at the true exchange rate, which turns out to be brutal, because $1 buys so much less on the day you finally understand what it's really worth. She looked at the bill for a long moment. She didn't touch it. And then she did the one dignified thing available to her, which was to understand completely and leave without making it a scene, no performance, no phones, nobody filming. The first entirely private moment of her life. And it was the moment she finally learned what she'd spent. She stood up. She left the $1 on the glass. She walked out. I didn't watch her go. That's the part I'd tell the 15-year-old with the notebook if I could reach him. You think the ending is watching them leave? It isn't. The ending is not needing to. I was already turning back to the next folder in the stack, another kid whose future needed a yes before the door finished closing behind her. I didn't look up. There was nothing left in her direction worth the turn of my head. And the most complete revenge I will ever take on Sienna Marlowe is that by the end she simply wasn't interesting anymore. The napkin, the $1, the plankton, the whole year of it filed, settled, closed. We funded the last 3 applicants. The gas station boy cried and apologized for crying, and Juno told him flat, "Everyone cries in this room, it's in the endowment," which is a lie. but it's the good kind. We closed the committee. The advisors shook our hands and told us, in the careful way adults talk to teenagers who own things, that it had been an unusually run process. And Juno said, "We're an unusual fund." And that was that. We already had the next thing. Of course we did. You don't spend 2 years teaching yourself to read the shadow under the foil and then stop seeing shadows the day your own story ends. While we'd been pulling the Ashcroft wall apart, Juno had noticed something in the wreckage 3 other shells. A different family, the same mail drop above the same nail salon, the same tidy little architecture of a debt built on purpose and pointed at someone who couldn't fight back. Somewhere across the county there was another kitchen table with a good lamp and an honest person doing finger math in the dark over a number that had been forged to break them. We had the receipts on it already. We just hadn't picked the day. "It's a bigger wall than Marcus's," Juno had said, laying it out on the good screen the week before. "Slower, meaner. It'll take a year." And I'd said, "Good. We're better at slow than they are." Because that's the thing nobody warned the people who forge debts and hand out dollars. The plankton found the bottom of the ocean, and it turns out the bottom of the ocean is where you can see everyone's feet. Afterward, Juno and I walked out to the parking lot, which is where every real thing in this story happened the day my mother was arrested. The day Juno left class to stand shoulder to shoulder with the accused kid. And now this. It had started to rain, the light kind. Juno had the folder of funded kids under her arm, the whole stack of yeses, which was heavier and worth more than any shoebox I ever hid under a bed. "Vale and Rayner," she said, looking at the folder. "Alphabetical. I still win." "We both win," I said, obviously. She bumped my shoulder with the folder, our whole language. The entire courtship we'd conducted in one repeated gesture over 3 years. Then, quieter, the once-a-year voice. "Your mom's got the son in the kitchen. You've got the fund. That kid's got a full ride. You did the thing you set out to do at 15, and you did it without becoming him." I checked. I've been checking the whole time. "Beat. You're allowed to be done now, Castle. You're allowed to just go be a person." "Working on it," I said. "I hear it's harder than foil." "Everything's harder than foil," Juno said. She was quiet a second, watching the rain do its light thing on the windshield of the boring car, and then she said, not looking at me, in the once-a-year voice, "You know the first day I saw you at that rack turning cards over and not scratching them? I almost didn't say anything. I'd decided people weren't worth the risk. 2 years of this school will teach you that." She finally looked over. I said something anyway. "It's the best bet I ever made, and I place bets for a living now." Beat, and the thaw shut like a window before I could get a word through it. "Don't make it weird." "You made it weird," I said. "I did not," she said, which is how I've known for 3 years that she loves me, and how she's known the same about me, and how neither of us has ever had to ruin it by saying so out loud. "Get in the car! There's a diner!" You think worse when you're hungry, and I have a whole list of things I want to be smug about. And item 1 is that my name comes first on the door. We got in the car, a deliberately boring car, because I meant it about the mistakes and we pulled out of the lot. And neither of us looked back at the glass building where a single dollar was drying on a conference table with nobody left to claim it. There was a diner. There was a list. There was, somewhere ahead, a next thing, because there's always a next thing when you've learned to read the shadows other people can't see. The rain did what rain does. The plankton drove off with the girl who'd read him right, toward a window full of morning sun, and a mother who finally slept, and a stack of kids who were about to stop doing math with their fingers. Sienna gave me $1 and thought she'd taken everything. She found out, in the end, exactly what a dollar buys, and by the time she understood it, I was already gone, not gloating, not watching, not even angry. Just gone, with the sun ahead and the receipts behind me, driving toward the rest of a life she'd accidentally handed me the keys to for one folded bill and a laugh. She had no idea what she bought for $1. Now she does.